Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 22nd episode of Season 1, Get Real with Jack and Cindy. I'm Cindy Morrison.
And I'm Jack Wallace. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. So today we're going to talk about the appraisal. Just sort of some of the standard things on appraisals, because that's something a lot of people don't really understand how it works. I think there's this kind of magic appraisal that you pay a lot of money to have, and this expert does all this research and comes out, and God love them, they work hard. I mean, they call us to ask questions about things that have closed in the past, and I'm always very happy when they do that, because we can give them a lot of nuance, because that's the only way they're going to really know how to truly get market value.
And let's first of all, let's talk about the different types of appraisals. So
Yeah.
there is an appraisal that your lender will do to see if the house appraises. You're not getting upside down in a house. And then there is an appraisal where somebody wants to sell their house or figure out measurements or whatever, that
more speculative type of an appraisal.
They call an appraiser.
Basically, the appraiser does the same appraisal, but there are different rules and different standards. Like a government-backed appraisal, for example, they can't count any space that is in the square footage, any space that is even partially underground.
What?
Yeah. So it's really crazy. And I had a house recently that we end up getting value, but they had to take the square footage way down because of the fact that the house kind of set into a hill. And so that part of it. And so the government doesn't want to count any of that square footage.
Okay, so clearly they've never seen The Wizard of Oz. Clearly they haven't watched the latest movie, Twisters, Little House on the Prairie. I mean, that's where you go to your high.
It is kind of interesting, because with everybody getting so eco-conscious, that is going to be like, I grew up in a house that's partially underground. My mom still lives in it, and it's very, good for like basement type utility. But I think that they just got so burned on people claiming basement space that wasn't actually, that now it's like, if it at all has any kind of subterranean leveling, they won't, you can't count it. So
and that's on VA?
I think that's on pretty much every government backed loan. So that'd be FHA, VA, I mean, most of them at the moment.
Okay.
Because that's kind of where we're going. Because right now, and the other thing too that's important is with an FHA loan, whenever you get the appraisal on an FHA loan, it's a little bit different. It's the same with VA, because it's kind of an appraisal and it's a bit of an inspection, not as much of an inspection as people think, but they may have requirements. So you have to repair wood rot, or you have to paint over something, or test for something, or, I've even had them ask for a structural to be done.
Oh, I've never had that yet.
So
a lot of wood rot though, they'll call out.
And so they do that, and then you meet those conditions, and then they come back out and they do an approval on it. But the thing that people don't know a lot of the time is that when you get an FHA appraisal, it holds for 6 months.
So say that one more time.
So when you get an FHA appraisal, it holds for 6 months. So whoever comes along with an FHA buyer, or any FHA buyer who wants to do FHA, that is going to be the appraised value you're going to get if you accept them.
So if the first deal falls apart to their FHA, that FHA appraisal will stay with the house if you have another FHA person that comes in. That's super important.
It is. And the thing is that you have to make that in your decision making when you're a seller, because you may turn them away and say, well, I'm not going to accept that. And that's fine. You might not want to accept that, but then it comes down to, you need to realize you're going to have a cash buyer or a conventional buyer. And, the FHA is looking at the same things that conventional is looking at. So you may end up getting the same number anyways, even with the conventional. But if anyone comes in with FHA, you have to take that FHA price.
I have a first-time home buyer, and we put in an offer on a house that is overpriced. It's been totally flipped. It's fantastic. And they finally came back to us and said they were not going to take his FHA loan because they knew they were high, and they didn't want that to stick with the property. They didn't want the appraisal to come in low, and suddenly there's a gap between what they're asking and what it appraises for. Somebody's got to make up that gap, either the buyer, the seller, or the buyer and the seller, or everybody walks away.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very tricky. I mean, I think it's also, that's the thing too, is I think there's this, let's back up just a little bit, because the one thing I've also had happen in the last year is that people go, well, let's have an appraisal and then we'll know what the value is. So I may come in with my evaluation and it's low, what I'm looking at. And then we had an appraiser come in, and they were coming in pretty high.
Yeah.
And now we've had to take the prices down and down and down, but they were looking at 6 months, previous, and they were finding properties that worked. But I wonder now, if we had that appraisal, would it be anywhere near that? Because they're looking at the previous 6 months now, which is very different than the previous 6 months a year ago. So, it's not a science, it's an art to a certain degree. They have to look at numbers, but there are parameters they have to stay in. And it's usually 6 months of the previous sales in the area specific to
And
that.
They try,
properties.
like properties. They try to stay in the same neighborhood if they can.
Yeah.
If not, then it's a half mile. If
You always
not,
want
it's
to
a
work
mile.
in and work your way out. So if you can't find it close to the house, you start going out, and you make exceptions for, like, let's say it's a house that sits on 15 acres and it's a ranch and it has barns and it has stables. Well, you might be lucky enough to find that around you, but a lot of times you have to go 10 miles or 5 miles out, so there are exceptions. But like for most homes, they want to stay within 1 mile, 1 square mile from your front door. So you just draw basically a circle around your house, and 1 mile out they can use. Then what, like we do with getting value, you start with that maybe, but I always start with the neighborhood first.
That's what I do.
So I always look at that, and then you go from that, you kind of grow a little bit there and a little bit, and you get your comps you need. Then you do the big market, which is a mile out, and then you do the really big market, which is the city, state, school district, whatever.
And like houses. So what that means, I have one that I'm listing next week that it is the smallest house in a very popular neighborhood.
Yeah.
And they're building new $1 million homes in this neighborhood. And I tried to explain,
two markets.
You're a unicorn because you're this small little house. I can't really compare it to your 3-bedroom, their 5-bedroom, you're 2,400 square feet and they're 5,000. It's completely different houses.
But do those houses add value? Yes. Because you're sitting in a neighborhood that is not going to deteriorate. So there is value in those houses. Has that raised your land value? Probably, because the land value that people are going to use to build those houses. However, there's a real kind of weird zone you get into when a house is the nicest but smallest in a home where there's a lot of gentrification and new construction going on, because it's too nice to sell it for lot value, but it's not updated enough to where it's appealing to people in that neighborhood at the price. So it can be a really strange place for your buyer to be in. So, I mean, I always kind of go, here's what it would be if someone leveled your house and to buy it to build, which, you can usually do kind of like a 4-time divide. So you take like, what are the normal houses in that neighborhood going for? And then, 1/4 of that's a basic principle for your land value. So that would be one way and then you go into trying to find other little houses that are still in that area and what they've gone for, which can be very tough.
Another thing I see that we face with appraisals is I've had homeowners that got their appraisal. So let's say it appraises at 500,000. Well, I've done my comps with the actual homes that are on the market and what has sold, and I see that it's 450. But they have this appraisal. I'm sorry, let me put that again. Theirs is 500. The appraisal comes in from the loan, their lender, and it's at 450. Why would there be a difference? And I know you can explain this really well, because there can be, between what an appraiser gives a homeowner and what the lender says the house is worth. And one thing, like an appraiser is often looking.
Lender is giving. I'm confused as to what, because typically the lender is giving the value that the appraiser gives it.
Yeah, I've had appraisals that have been one price,
Yeah.
and then the people won't give an offer that's as high as the owner wants because they know that the lender is
Sure.
probably not going to appraise it for that value.
Sure.
So that's two different appraisals.
Right. And you have to be conscious of that when you're, I mean, if something is completely out of range and you know that it's not going to appraise and you know that these sellers are not going to take anything more and your people don't want to bring anything, then you really could be with the, have a mess. Typically when that happens, then the buyer and seller make an agreement between themselves. Like the buyer might go, I do think it's worth more than that and I'll pay a little bit and then you can pay a little bit, or absolutely not, but if you'll take what I offered and then we'll take it, which happens quite a bit. So yeah, I think the difference I see right now is just that I think a lot of the appraisers are kind of in the fear factor like they were in 2008 when they were caught. They'd appraised a lot of things, and then whenever the banks got them back, they went to sell them. Well, they weren't worth anything like they were, what they thought, which that also the market shifted.
Right.
But then they were also looking at the properties and going, wait, this property is not as nice, or it's a lot rougher, or maybe the information wasn't quite right. So that the appraisers have become a little bit more like in that scared zone of we're going to be overly protective, which has been going on since 2008, honestly. But I feel like there's a little bit of that going on now because they were a little bit like, are we moving into that market? But we haven't seen a lot of foreclosures, so we're not seeing that.
So if you have a seller who wants to put their property on the market, do you suggest they call an appraiser in or just look at the comps?
At times I do,
both?
because I think sometimes it's like whenever I'm coming up with numbers from what I have, because the appraiser does have different resources. I will say the RPR that we do is pretty good because it pulls from a lot of different sources that we didn't used to have. More for sale by owners and that kind of tax record stuff. So that gives us a little bit more insight, but I think that the appraisers can give you a lot of interesting value. I've had a backfire.
I knew it was coming.
Bless
Sorry.
you. I've had a backfire on me though, because because then they come in high and I'm not an appraiser. And so it's like, well, but it's worth it to my people to then try it at that higher price and to say to the public, well, we have an appraisal for this amount. So it's not like, it's not like when you're on the market and you're overpriced and you're like, we just think it's more. You can go, well, we just got a current appraisal and it was for this amount and we're still a little bit under that. So I think there's a little bit of appeal with that.
I think it also works with unicorn properties that it's hard to find a like to a like.
Yeah.
And so it really kind of gives you an idea of what the value of the land is and the house. And
honestly, Cindy, the thing that's nice about that too is it's going to be less like you're going to be caught off guard when it gets an appraisal whenever they get a loan on it, because you kind of know you're within the realm of reality. But also it gives you something to fight the other appraiser. If they come in low, you can go, well, here's a certified appraiser who just did this and said this amount. Now, the one thing too is you're picking your appraiser, and sometimes people kind of pick an appraiser they know that knows the area and blah, blah, blah. Well, when it's a loan, they do a random draw and you could get somebody who has no idea about the area who's doing that appraisal. So sometimes it's good to have gotten the person who does know their area first to say, here's what why I'm fighting you on this.
Because I've had appraisers for loan companies call me and say, where did you come up with this number? And I'm able to send them the appraisal, and that helped.
It does help because we can argue them. I mean, we can. There's a certain time period, and sometimes they'll come up, sometimes they won't. I mean, I find most of the time they won't because that's them stating that they're wrong. But if you find a comp that I mean that's fair. But if you find a comp that it's glaring,
right,
they will sometimes bring it up. So
different ways that you can figure out how much your house is worth. Your tax records.
Yes.
Tax records are going to show what the county, at least here in Oklahoma, thinks your property is worth. People don't necessarily call the county and say, hey, I just added on, 300 more square feet. I would love to pay more taxes on that.
People want to be valued lower. It's kind of like income tax. We want to make less money when we're paying our taxes, but we want to make more money all year long.
Exactly.
We have to, same thing.
So you've got that. Next, you have Zillow, or one of those apps, and they're using AI technology, artificial intelligence.
But straight across averaging, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they don't know any of the updates you've done to your house, or if there's deferred maintenance. People, when they come
Also,
in.
just the subtleties of the area.
Yeah.
Because you can go 4 or 5 blocks over and it's a whole different area than where you're pricing. And if you're somebody who knows that, you can kind of make sure you're targeting a little bit more that area is more like this area.
Right.
But like, let's say you have a highway cutting in between you. On this side of the highway, the properties have not been taken care of. It's, there's a lot of move in, move out rental. And on this side, it's really well done. And I mean, that could be a quarter of a mile from that property, but that does not relate to this product. That's when you get into the like. But Zillow is just looking at straight across.
So it could make it really low. It could make it really high. So please do not, when I have an open house and somebody comes in, well, Zillow said it was this price. I'm like, okay.
What I think is funny about Zillow, though, is that people think it's the Bible of real estate whenever it says their house is worth more than it really is. And they think that anybody else's is like a lie, and that it's just whenever it's higher than they want to pay.
Sure.
So it's kind of the the human factor of that part of it, which I think is normal. But every now and then a Zillow estimate is right, but I find most of the time you really need someone to fine tune it a lot.
So you've got the taxes, you've got Zillow. Next, you have an agent,
and it may get better. I mean, we are getting more technology.
Absolutely. So. Then your next one is an agent who is actually going to know that neighborhood. We have something called RPR where we can go in, and like Jack was saying earlier, it takes in a lot more into account than just the numbers we can see.
Just the MLS, which is what we used to pull off, was just the MLS. But now there's like one that has a lot of different data points to use. Yeah.
Sure.
And it's been pretty good. I mean, I'm always impressed with it. You go in and again, fine tune and say, oh, they added a pool, or it's actually this amount of square foot, or blah, blah, blah. And then it'll adjust it based on that. And it gives you a little bit, when did they do the kitchen renovation? You can, adjust for it.
And they'll actually,
they get values.
Was the kitchen renovation 2 years ago, or was it 10 years ago?
And it's not just us kind of guessing what that's going to be. It's very mathematical. And so that's where AI is really come in handy for that kind of thing.
So taxes, Zillow, agents, and then next would be to have an appraiser come in. And that's not inexpensive to have an appraiser appraise your property.
And you don't get to use the appraisal. Okay, so let's go back. If someone comes in with a cash offer, a lot of times what people will do, they'll take the offer because they think we don't have to worry about an appraisal, which, okay, that can be true. But if you're the buyer's agent, you can put special conditions. The property needs to meet appraisal, and that we're going to have a certified appraiser appraise the property. So don't just assume just because it's cash that isn't if that caveat were to be put in there. But if it's not, then the contract is not contingent on an appraisal. But if there's a loan, the mortgage company is always going to have an appraisal, and that price is going to be contingent upon it meeting the sales price.
And deals will fall apart because the lender will not give you the loan if they do not think it's worth the price of the house or more.
And they don't have leeway. Like, they kind of have to live or die by that. They can talk to the appraiser and try to get some adjustments made based on new comps or whatever, but they don't get to say, oh no, we're going to go ahead and do the loan. I mean, it is kind of the final word.
Well, and I love to bring in an appraiser, and I try to do this on all my properties, to just have them measure the property.
Yeah, which that's good.
Yeah. And so, and I pay for it, it's $100 or $150, whatever it is. So we know the exact square footage, and if it's more than the courthouse, I have to put that square footage appraisal actually on MLS. So I show the proof of why I'm saying it's that square footage. And generally, because when the builders are building the house, they want to try to keep it as small as possible. They're paying, on every square inch. But when appraisers come out and measure an existing house, a lot of times they're going around the outside, and suddenly you're getting more square footage. I've only had one that wasn't.
Which was a big deal in the 80s, because they would just send college kids out to measure. That's really the truth. they would just send them out and they would measure corner to corner, corner to corner, corner to corner, and then say it's 1 story, 2 story, 1.5, and then they just figure out the tax. And people just kind of never really challenged it.
Yeah.
But now it's kind of a hot button. But then again, it's like people don't want to get to, like we were just saying, people don't want to go, oh, by the way, you're discounting me this amount of square foot. You may want to do that because its value is going to go up.
And we actually have a box that you have to check if you're the buyer, saying either I am stuck on square footage and this house is only worth the square footage, or I understand that's a close square footage.
Which came out of a big lawsuit about 12 years ago, I think, maybe longer, maybe shorter. But somebody was like, I mean, it was off by like 15 square feet.
Oh my gosh.
And they sued and they ended up winning. And so the whole thing kind of became, you need to sign off that you understand this is, I mean, because it isn't a science. I mean, it's, even with that, like if the ceiling slopes in at a certain height, then it's under 8 foot, they can only count such a percentage of that room, the floor space. So, I mean, it really is, and then do you count the closet area? Do you not count the closet area? Do you count? I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can and can't do. So
you said something earlier, and I want to go back to that because this drives me crazy. One story.
I drive you crazy?
No, not you. Our time together actually is very special here. I love you.
Love you.
All right. So 1 story versus 2 story versus 1.5 story. What the heck is that?
A 1.5?
Yeah.
So like I live over by La Fortune Park. So my neighborhood, there are a lot of 1.5.
But that would be like you go upstairs to get to another section by level or whatever.
Yeah, by level.
Yeah.
So like where a 2 story is basically like a salt box or a 4 square where every room underneath has an equal room above.
Okay.
But a 1.5 would be like you have a 1 story kind of ranch style that pops up and you have like a game room upstairs or a couple of bedrooms.
That makes sense to me,
so
but
that's
I've gotten several appraisals that say it's a 1.5, and I'm like, I swear there is a whole second story up there, not just a half.
Yeah, it really, and I think, I don't know how the appraisers, I honestly don't know exactly how the appraisers qualify that. I think it's probably up to their discretion.
Yeah.
But I also know, like, to me, if there was room above the garage, but then it was another area, you would still call it a 2 story because you were taking space above the garage where you were taking it away over another part of the house. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You're not counting that garage as square footage.
And I've seen houses like that on MLS that are a 2 story house, but it says it's 1.5.
But I just had buyers from Salt Lake City that were saying that in Salt Lake City, you can count the garage as square footage. So they build these like 4-car garages to get more square footage. I mean, it's so interesting how every market's different. Yeah.
Although you put a mini split in there and, you can hang out 24/7.
Yeah.
By the way, this is my new.
We call that a marriage saver.
favorite term is a mini split. And
which is funny because they said they love mini splits. That is so funny. I hope they're watching. They were like, we love mini splits. They really make life so funny.
Oh, I told my husband, I said, we're putting one in the garage because it was 100 and however many good degrees today. And
it is nice to have them in there.
Yeah. But it cools your garage with not being a window unit, not being your AC. It's kind of something in between that goes on the wall.
Yeah. Yeah.
My new favorite thing.
They're good. They are good. My garage stays pretty temperate.
Does it?
I mean, I don't hang out in my garage.
Yeah.
If I hung out there, I may not think that, but yeah, it stays pretty good.
So anything else you want to cover with appraisals?
I think the biggest thing is that everyone just needs to realize it's a part of it and that it's something that, it catches us by surprise a lot of the time because, we kind of go by, I always have an argument with appraisers because they're seeing the market 6 months ago. We're seeing the market today. Mm-hmm. So like when I'm looking at values, I really hover around the things that have pended as much as what is closed. Mm-hmm. Because if it's pended, that means that's what's selling right now. Mm-hmm. And if that price point is going up and it's in pending, but it hasn't closed, and I look at all the closed and the closed are much lower, then I know we're in an uptrend. Mm-hmm. And so to give no value to that is difficult in my mind.
Yeah.
Because, and the appraisers are always like, we can't go past that 6 months. But the problem is, when do we get values of houses going up? Because if we're always stuck in the past and we're always using that, when do
Because
we
we're
value?
at least 30 days behind.
Yeah. So when do we actually value? You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
So it keeps things, I think it's a little bit of a, I understand why it's done. I think it's smart that they do it, but it can be a real problem because it's living so much in the past. The other thing, like I said, can be a real problem because it can give you a false sense of the past whenever the past was. Like if you're looking at the pendings and they're all going down and you're telling your client, oh, well, yeah, 6 months ago, this sold for this amount of money, so you should be able to get that. But I'm looking at pendings and one after the other has gone down in price and square foot price. That's not going to probably happen right now.
And we're not going to know the actual sales price till it closes, but you can look at what it was listed for.
And then also right now we do finally have price or not prices. I mean, they are coming down a little bit, but the interest rates are coming down a little bit.
Yes.
Like in a good way. They really are kind of, we have a long way to go, I think, to get to where it's going to make some major changes in the market, but we definitely are getting some good steps. And
last Friday, as a matter of fact, it had,
yeah.
a little wiggle down.
Yeah, you know me, I'm a nerd. The 10-year, I was in camp, so I wasn't watching every financial show. I was literally just doing like kids singing and dancing for 10 days and then doing listing and all that kind of stuff. But no, it's like my stocks are down, but I'm okay with that because it's also put the 10-year down to like 4.06 or something. It was at 4.4, and that's where that interest rate kind of hovers based on a little bit.
Right.
Not completely directly correlated, but it's a good indicator. So yeah, that's come down a lot. I mean, that makes a big difference. I shouldn't say never. It's going to be a long time, or probably never will we be in the 3% zone again. But if we can get into comfortable fives, that's going to be a game changer. So when that happens, prices that have been coming down are going to go up. Inventory is going to shrink. I mean, we're still having the same issue of people sitting on low mortgages
because whether they bought it or they refinanced during that time.
But the thing is, if we can get it to the 5 and someone's at a 3 something and they really need to make the change, it's not nearly as drastic of a difference in payment as what we were looking at when it was 8. So I think it will move some people off just out of necessity and boredom. But it's still, I think it's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging to get inventory up. It is.
So let's kind of talk about that market capsule, and then I want to wrap up talking about camp.
Yeah.
So,
okay. I can always talk about it.
So we are seeing more inventory now, which means, if there's low inventory, sellers are going to charge more for their homes.
Yeah, supply and demand, basic supply and demand.
So as prices go up, as inventory comes up, that's a little more on the buyer's side where it's been on the seller's side for so long. But if that interest rate, people say, well, I'm going to wait for the interest rate. Well, as that interest rate, if it ticks down, you're now going to have more competition as a buyer because people who have been sitting on the sidelines go, okay, now I want to jump in and sell my house and buy a house.
Yeah, I think we've been in a standoff. So I think you've had the inventory that, because there's so little inventory, it should be moving. But because the interest rates are so high, then the inventory has not been moving because people are like, I can't afford that payment on that house that I used to could. So even in that supply problem market, sellers have had to bring prices down to meet buyer expectation to get that to work.
Yes.
So that's why we've seen some little bit of ratcheting down of prices coming down, but not major.
Right.
So as the interest rates go down, it gives buying power to the buyer, which means they can reach a little higher and then they can start absorbing that inventory. So that's kind of where that's going to go. So,
but if too many buyers jump in, you may have multiple offers on really good properties.
It could be back to that. Yeah. Yeah. Because I kind of at the moment bring it right. Because it's been sort of stagnant. So it's like that would be a good problem to have, except that then we just don't have the replacement,
right.
and a lot of builders have kind of pulled back a little bit. They're not building as much. And so, it takes a while for them to gear up.
Right.
So, and I also think materials are still high. So it's like
lumber is still really high.
Yeah. So, it's like we're in an interesting time. It's going to take a little time to mend, we're getting there. We will get there, but
And
it's,
don't think your house is going to sell tomorrow if you put it on today.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's like I've really talked to a lot of younger people recently, and there is that, it was so much cheaper to buy a house. Well, and I think there's some truth to that for sure. But I think when we get the economy and all of this kind of balanced out, I think there's going to be a lot more opportunity for them to figure out ways to do it. We may have to change. I hate to say this, and we may have to go 35 years or 40 years. Maybe like the car business where things go a little longer, but most people don't live in a house that long anyways. So if they're going to be there for 7 to 10 years, there's probably not that much difference whether they're on a 30-year or a 35-year note.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, we're going to see some market changes because that's going to happen.
And that's why we love doing this podcast, because we want weekly to keep you up to date on the latest things.
And I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying I think that may be a trend to be looking, because I mean, I know your husband sells cars, so forgive me, but like it's ridiculous that people finance cars for 7 and 8 years. To me, I'm like, what? I mean, that is a long time.
Yes, it is.
Kind of like committing to buying a sweater that you're going to wear every day. I don't know. It's just, I mean, again, it works because that's what people need to make it work.
Right.
So I think it's just a supply and demand kind of thing. So I think we'll see a lot of things changing with that. But I think appraisals are going to kick us a little bit.
Yeah.
Because we have had things selling a little lower, and as the interest rates go down and people are willing to reach up, sellers have there's less inventory, so they're going to want more, and then things aren't going to appraise, and there's going to have to be worked out. So that is why one of the main reasons why I thought it was good for us to talk about appraisals, because I think it's going to be a challenging time, because what we were doing before was the opposite. People were getting a lot of equity for what they were paying. Now they're going to be deficit.
Yeah. And before we wrap up, you just finished your camp with Kristen Chenoweth.
It was wonderful.
Kristen Chenoweth Broadway Boot Camp.
She was not able to be there this year because, she's in previews for Queen of Versailles, which she's getting amazing reviews for. I'm going very soon, finally. That was very hard to be here during all that. But so they've been changing and working on that, so that's been good. But the kids were so good; they were just
talented.
Oh, you went, yeah.
I was
Thank
there.
you for being there. Aren't they amazing?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I wanted to be there for you. I wanted to be there for Kristen and for these kids who have worked so hard for 10 days.
And we have some from Oklahoma, but most of them are from, the four corners of the earth. So
you had 4 countries.
Yeah, we had 4 countries and the U.S. So 5 countries total represented. And we were down a little bit on that because I think last year we had 7 countries, but we had 2 from Australia, 2 from Peru. So it was actually more than it sounds like. And then we had, I think, 22 states. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's only 65 kids. I mean, we and for every kid that makes it, I think 8 had to be turned down, which is hard. But no, they were just great. And the thing that you have to remember too is these are kids that are the number one in their town, say, and so they're used to being the lead of everything. So they come here and it's like everybody's really good.
Yeah. So welcome to Broadway, kids.
So we've kind of made it where the camp performances are really more group number kind of things, and with some solos here and there, but everyone has like a little feature. Right. But if we tried to showcase every kid, we couldn't do it, and so then you get kids who don't really get used that deserve to be. Right. So it's 12 days and it's 10 days. Day before a day after.
He really said it was 100 days. It felt like. No, I'm just kidding.
Actually, it went by so fast. And also it's cool because there's all these, like, that's my thing. I love theater, and so all these people come, and now there's been people who come for years and years, and like Christopher Sieber was here this year, and he's one of the leads in the new musical Death Becomes Her. And so he was here and he's been here before, and I just adore him. He's so fun and so great with the kids,
and very handsome.
Yeah, and so it was great because he was kind of the Kristen in some ways, the celebrity that they all, and he would sit in the cafeteria every day and talk to them, and he's just a great guy, and the kids just love him. So it was lucky for us that he was on break from when they were in previews in Chicago to when they go live in New York. So yeah.
It was really special. Hopelessly devoted to you blew me out of the water. I mean, there were several things that it started good and then it just got better and great. And
Well, again,
at the
you
end,
have
you
these
wanted to be on your
incredible
feet.
voices. I mean, people really should come see it because
Yeah.
I mean, it's free and it's like you're seeing talent. You're seeing the future talent of America or the world. Well, it's even like we gave the one girl that we just adore, who's just such a huge talent from England, got the scholarship, and she's talking about studying in the States. I mean, like, and we've been with these kids for 4 years. I mean, so it's just, these are our kids. Chris and I always say, I always say we don't have children, but we have lots of kids.
Yeah.
And these are our kids.
Well, and one thing y'all really preached during the event, and I appreciate this because that industry can be so cutthroat. Kindness.
Oh, that's our number one thing.
Simple thing. I think, especially since COVID, people are just mean.
I was just listening to a podcast after camp, actually, and there was a guy who was an introvert, which I get because I know people don't believe it, but I'm an introvert. And he ended up being appointed to city council by accident, kind of like he just, kind of got it on. And then he ended up taking like public speaking classes and he really worked hard at it. And then in the end, he ended up deciding he wanted to run for mayor of the town because he wanted to do a platform of kindness because he was tired of all the fighting.
Yeah.
And so he did this whole thing about wanting to make the city a kinder city, and everyone got behind him and it became this huge thing. And I was thinking, I think it's a message we all want to hear. Like we just, the other thing too is I said, these kids are all the best. So the first 2 or 3 days is always like calming them down. You're not going to be, don't worry about being the lead here. Don't worry about it. It's process over product.
Mm-hmm.
We work on getting the process because, like that's the thing too with our business. It's process until you're done.
Right.
I mean, the product is the process, right?
Right.
We are just constantly making the deal happen until the minute it closes. And then we move to the next thing. But it's like, that's process. That's not a product.
Right.
We don't send you home with soap that we made and then you're done. So it's very similar in
Mm-hmm.
theater. It's like you're constantly in process. Like, Kristen's doing the show and it's in previews in Boston. They'll make changes again. And then when it goes to New York, they'll do all the stuff in between. Then when it gets there, then there'll be the process of figuring out what do they need to cut and change to make the show better. And then the first 2 weeks on Broadway, they give new stuff, take stuff away. Then on opening night, then the show becomes what it's going to always be.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's a process for years and years. Right. So, I think it's the same thing with real estate. We're in the process. We're always in the process. I mean, this whole NAR thing, it's a process.
Yeah.
And we can freak out because we don't know what we're doing on things and that makes us uncomfortable because we're used to knowing what we're doing, right?
Right.
But it's the process of selling real estate and following the law. So
I loved the message of kindness. And I think sometimes people are like squirrels. They're like, I want all the nuts, I got to do for the whole winter, where there's enough nuts for everybody. You can't be jealous of somebody else or belittle them because it only makes you look bad. But that business in particular is cutthroat.
And you know what? I will say, I mean, I had a husband who committed suicide. And he was a wonderful person. It's not a small mission of mine to extend to people to be kind to themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that we have this thing.
I didn't even go there, and you're exactly right.
Kindness is something, and we do gratitude at the end of every day, and I run the gratitude, and it's like, people hear that and they think it's a prayer meeting. Well, it's not. I mean, it's, in a way, I guess it could be if that's what works for somebody, but it's about teaching them the value of being grateful, because all the studies show you're not happy because you're not grateful because you're happy. You are happy because you are grateful. So no matter what's happening in your life, finding things to be grateful for actually makes you happy, because you can't control everything, but you can control your attitude.
You brought that up. Yeah, because I was thinking one person to another, and you were right. We need to be kinder to ourselves, because
You have
that's
no
internal.
idea what's happening to somebody.
Yeah, and that's the internal language that your brain is hearing, and your brain believes it if you keep saying it.
When I've got, these 65 beautiful souls in front of me that all have their own insecurities, their own fears, their own needs, wants. I mean, and I can't just say, well, buck up, or it's going to be like this. I mean, there's sometimes when you got to buck up, right?
Right.
But the thing is, you have to remember being grateful for just being in the room. Like that's the thing too. So people make a camp that they were one of 8, right?
Right.
But then, okay, well that's good. But now I'm here. I've got to be the best. So we have to check ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and remind ourselves that this is about making them better, not just performers, but humans. And to me, that goes very hand in hand. I don't think you can be a great performer if you don't have a great amount of pathos and love for humans. And maybe not people.
Kristen is an exact. I mean,
my gosh.
I think she, she's incredibly talented, but I think she also gets cast in things because there might be a million talented people, right, or 7 or however many, but her kindness and the way she relates to people, the producers, the directors, the music artists, I mean, they love that. They
do. And I think it's even funny because she plays a lot of kind of not nice characters, but she plays them so nicely.
Yes.
I mean, because, the thing that people don't think about is whenever you're teaching acting, people don't know they're bad.
Oh.
You don't walk around going, I'm going to do terrible things. You're doing what you think is the right thing for you. So that may be evil to everybody else, but in your mind, you are justified in doing it.
And that's how they can look themselves in the mirror.
Absolutely. Okay. So when you have a kind person who has that and they're playing that character, I think they play it in a much more relatable way.
Yes.
Like it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but at the same time, I'm going to get what's mine.
Right.
Right. Which we all have a little bit of that.
Of course.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's interesting. I think I always say that camp is very personality driven, and that is the personality of one person. And it was kind of crazy because there was such a feeling this year of her presence. And it was crazy because she was not there. I mean, right, she would Skype in some and do stuff as she could, but I mean, it's what we have built is really representing who she is, and I'm so proud of that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Which means it has an endless lifespan.
And that's the goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we were saying whenever all this came up. She was so heartbroken. I said, well, not to be morbid, but we want this to live beyond us. Mm-hmm. So, and also kids need to realize if you go into this and you're on Broadway, you're going to miss a lot of birthdays. You're going to miss a lot of parties. You're going to miss a lot of holidays, anniversaries. Like you are on stage when everybody else is not working.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just part of it. Like,
right.
It's not the fun part of that, but it is part of it to be in that lifestyle.
Yep,
so
exactly right.
Cool.
Well, with that, guys, please be kind to others and to yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's so important.
And that's a really good thing. It's easy to preach it to kids, but like it should be our mission in general.
Well, yeah. Mean kids grow into mean adults. So let's catch them early, please. All right.
Thanks for joining us.
Yes. Guys. Thank you so much. Get real.